This is Sirens, a new series brought to you by the Ladies of Bombshell, where we dissect the institutions of American power. Join us as we sound the alarm on technology, governance, and national security issues, and maybe lure some men to their death. This week, in our mini episode, we are excited to introduce our guest, Kathryn Edwards. She's an economic consultant and the host of the Optimist Economy podcast. Kathryn, welcome.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me.
We are so delighted to have you, and I am delighted to have a whole conversation here on Sirens where we talk about economics. It's going to be so great.
I had to get Radha's questions just to back off from the nerdiest of nerdy to okay, you haven't even introduced what that term meant. You actually need to give our listeners just the tiniest of on ramp in order to figure out what on earth is going on as we let two economists go nerd out here. I should also say, Kathryn, we did as our question of the week the episode rather to introduce. I gave them options that we could either do what you had to look up in the dictionary this week or executive order. And we picked executive order and paid tribute to our Optimist Economy friends down south. Yeah, you're down south.
I'm down south. I'm in Houston, and Robin is in LA. So your Optimist friends in small, sprawling metropolises who are probably on a highway right now, and they're probably stuck in traffic because they live in LA and Houston. And you know what? It's not cold. So that's where they are.
We have two economists and two Texans, and it's hard to know which one of those things we're going to talk about most.
Totally.
That is actually that's a fair question. That's a fair point.
Well, so again, really excited to have you on, and really we wanted to start by just kind of trying to look at what is actually happening in the economy. And Kathryn, you've written a lot about this, about the ghost recession, now the ghost recovery. And there's lots of talks about things like low unemployment or economic growth. But can you help us kind of understand why maybe the economy looks good but feels broken, and what is going on holistically in the U.S. economy?
Okay.
Easy question.
Easy question.
Start off simple, and we'll build.
You know what?
There.
Cut me off at 30 minutes, okay? So I always think it's really helpful to zoom out. And if you zoom out and you think of America and its modern economy since World War II, we go through things called business cycles, where the economy grows until it starts to slow down. It enters a recession. We shed jobs. Things get, this is a technical term, rejiggered in the economy, and then we start to grow again. And we think of these cycles as being kind of like a natural part of a capitalist economy. So we've had 13-ish since World War II, and they always start with a recession. And the one that we're in right now started with the pandemic recession in March of 2020, where the U.S. economy ground to a screeching halt and shed over 22 million jobs in a matter of weeks. Unemployment shot up to officially 15%, but unofficially it was closer to 20. 1 in 5 people were looking for work. I mean, it was truly catastrophic. And the business cycle that kicked off has been weird. It just hasn't been like the ones that come before, not just because of the way that it started, but because of the way that the government responded to it, because of the way that people responded to it, the way that businesses responded to it. And it has only been 5.5 years. And yet we have lived lifetimes in this economy since the pandemic. And that, I think, is a good way to orient yourself into what's going on. And that ever since we started to recover from the pandemic, the question has been, when is the shoe going to drop and we enter a quote unquote real recession? This was one that the pandemic forced on us. But what about the one that we were supposed to have? The one that was this, just the economy slows down after it grew for a while. And so this has been this almost constant search and evaluation of the recession is going to come, right? We're about to have it, right? And that is the tenor of economic conversations for almost 5 years. And we've had different candidates as to what has been the cause of the recession we think will come. Is it the recovery package, the inflation that spiked afterwards, or in the case of the most recent presidency, some terrible economic policy that the White House is pursuing? Is we've had different reasons for thinking the economy is going to decline, but we've been looking for it.
But we do see things like growth and some unemployment, some unemployment reduction. So What are these like sort of usually cited numbers on job growth or GDP growth? What are they missing about the economic reality?
So the size of the economy is GDP, and getting bigger is better, and getting smaller is worse. Great. The ability of the economy to produce jobs for the people who want them is the unemployment rate. Higher is worse, lower is better. And these two things are kind of come together in the monthly jobs number, which is the number of jobs that the economy has created in the past month. And what's been happening for about a year is that we are seeing signs that the economy is slowing down, but they're not all happening at the same time. So, like 1 month, GDP will be really weak, and but then the next, or 1 quarter rather, but the next quarter it'll be strong. But in that quarter that GDP was strong, we have terrible job growth, but the unemployment rate doesn't go up. And now we're in a quarter where GDP is going to be strong and job growth is fine, but unemployment is starting to rise at a pretty steady clip. All of these things mean that the economy is slowing down slowly. So one way to think about it is where think of like cars on like a 4-lane street headed towards a red light, right? They're all slowing down, but they're not moving in perfect tandem. Like some car is going to get to the red light first, and another car is going to like maybe coast as long as possible before they have to brake. You can think of the economic indicators as they're all moving towards a red light, but they're not necessarily all stopping at the same time. That's really hard to parse. I mean, it's hard for economists to parse. It's hard for humans, just regular humans out in the world to parse, especially when it has to intersect with how they live their economic lives and what they see in their paycheck and in the grocery cart and their electric bill. And so that all comes together. I have my own version of why I think this is happening and kind of like what's really going on, but you know, a lot of times, especially with recessions, we don't really have a great idea of what caused them until we're well past them. And it's in the wreckage that we see the real cause and not kind of in the slowing down.
Just on this point around that, I love the analogy there of the cars on the highway. I think that is an incredible way to think about this. So, swinging back to our earlier point, is this slowdown of kind of competing slowdowns that we're seeing? Is this what's coming before a full recession, or are we already in one? We're just calling it something else, or is this actually just kind of like I hate to say new thing because it's probably not a new thing, but is this a new moment that is complex? And this is one of the reasons why we're having a hard time describing it, particularly since public sentiment is also a factor here in terms of how any of these numbers or these impacts are perceived.
Okay, few things. One, we don't say that we're in a recession until we're like at least 6 months in. And we'll say it's the National Bureau of Economic Research Business Cycle Dating Committee. Great at parties, believe me. They basically meet to look at all of the economic data and decide if we're in a recession. And they always do it with a significant lag.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't say that the US entered a recession in 2008. They declared that recession in October to have started the prior December. There's a huge lag. And the reason why is because you don't want to automatically trigger a recession. Like one report comes out that is bad, and now we're in recession. That would instill panic. And it would also give us, less control over stopping a recession from coming. All of these indicators starting to like kind of blink red at different times. That should be motivation to intervene to prevent a recession from happening, which is why we have this distance. It's not just that economists get off on being withholding of economic intelligence and understanding. It's that we also want to give policymakers a chance to say like, hey, this isn't good, but it's not a recession yet. There's still time for you to do something productive in the economy to prevent one from happening. So that's where a lot of the uncertainty comes from, is that we could be 6 months in a recession before we find out officially that, yeah, this is definitely a downturn. But that's not necessarily for a bad reason. The other thing I would say is, I don't think that the news or the economic data has become harder to parse. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is the past 2 recessions we've been through, I don't know how else to describe it. They were big and bad. I mean, the pandemic recession, you knew when it started. It started that week that 4 million people applied for unemployment insurance because they'd all lost their job. I mean, the Great Recession, aka the financial crisis and foreclosure crisis, I mean, it was pretty obvious when banks were closing early so they wouldn't have a run on like the largest banking institutions in America that we were clearly in a recession. But the recessions prior to that, I mean, getting past the experience of most people today, especially young people, they creep up on you and they often creep themselves out the door. Like they're not as severe as the two we've went through. And it's hard for us to understand what a normal economic contraction looks like when the two worst recessions from the Great Depression were the last two. Now, hopefully that doesn't become the norm. Hopefully these were just historical recessions that we get to walk away from and get to have our normal kind of bad, but not horrific recessions again. And they tend to come up a lot slower, tend to be not as quite severe, and we tend to get past them a lot quicker than we have. And so that's something to keep in mind, that we're not really accustomed to experiencing a mild recession. We've all been through unprecedented time after
I
unprecedented
know. I
time.
think there's been too
We're
many
millennials.
generational
Really not
events.
fair.
I'd like fewer generational events.
So precedented. Give me precedented. Yeah, but
I love
for the economy,
precedents.
some precedents would be helpful. So I think those are two things that make all of this a little hard to parse. Well, at the same time, there's this like very. Are we allowed to cuss on this one?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank God. I've been holding it in. There's this really shitty part about living in a capitalist society where you could be doing horribly and the economy is fine.
Yeah.
And it's not really incumbent upon individuals to say, hey, my situation is absolutely grim, but the economy is amazing. Like you don't want a human to have to say that. And we shouldn't, even in the worst recession, I mean, even at the absolute worst for the US economy, you're talking maybe 10% official unemployment. Mm-hmm. Or if you look at underemployment and people who are marginally attached, you're talking 15. That means 85% of people have a job and are still getting a paycheck. So what does it mean to be struggling in an economy when even at its worst, 85% of people are doing fine? And we know you experience economic distress, it's like 0 or 100. But the economy, you could be just one of the casualties.
Yeah.
That's very hard for people to square. And I think that young people in particular are kind of coming into an economy that has had a really weak hiring market for 2 years. And it's hard for them to hear that the economy is okay when they're struggling. That's actually a pretty common capitalist experience, but one that's hard. That's a hard way to enter the world. And so I appreciate the noise that they're making about this because the economy can do better. A lot of times the people who don't do well get sidelined and marginalized and minimized as it being their fault. Like unemployed people are lazy and young people picked the wrong major and they're too woke and care too much about trans people to get a good job in engineering like we all should. Like you end up demonizing people who don't do well because they're such a small portion. And so it's important for Americans to stand up and say, I work hard, I try hard, I make good decisions. That's not working.
And maybe that's a good jumping off point because, a lot of what we're talking about here is really, I don't know, how the labor markets are functioning, and that as a much more meaningful, more than GDP, more than even unemployment rates, which of course have this complexity of who you're actually counting in which category. So maybe we can take a minute just to unpack what's actually happening for workers right now and how that relates to like either their conditions or the job availability and how that relates to the numbers or headlines that we see to kind of help draw that distinction.
Yeah, the unemployment rate in September, the most recent month of data available, was 4.4%, which historically is actually pretty low for the US. We consider that to be like an incredible victory in a lot of economic eras to have an unemployment rate is 4.4. But it has gone up about a point since April of 2023 when it hit its low. So that's a slow burn of a worsening labor market to have your unemployment rate increase by about a point over the course of a year and a half. Or sorry, 2.5. What year is it?
2025.
I'm pretty sure.
It's 2025. I'm like, man, it's November and it's finally getting to me that it's actually 2025. Yeah. But for 2.5 years to increase an unemployment rate, that is your North Star of saying, yes, the labor market is getting worse. But what worse looks like has a lot of different manifestations in this labor market. One version of worse that a lot of people experience is they're not moving around as much from job to job. Another version of worse is because they're not moving around as much, they're not getting as many raises and their wages aren't rising as quickly and their income isn't necessarily jumping the way that it would be in a really tight labor market. But by far the most visible and dramatic casualty of this labor market is hiring. Even though the unemployment rate is just 4.4%, hiring rates, which is the share of people who get hired into a job as a share of the overall workforce, that is at levels, I mean, they don't mean anything. If I said 3 or 10, like you wouldn't know what that meant for the hiring rate. But the levels that it's at now are typically levels we see when the unemployment rate is closer to 8 or 9%. So we've experienced this like historical divergence of the unemployment rate hasn't risen as much, but hiring has dropped off a cliff. And that's really hard for new job seekers or people who are re-entering the labor market, that basically firms are hoarding labor. They're not firing people, which would get the unemployment rate up really quickly, but they're not hiring people either. That means that they are basically holding on to what they have and they are not really looking for new talent. Now,
But
go ahead.
but that means workers aren't exiting the marketplace either, right? Because that would generate room for talent too. So employers are hoarding workers and workers are hoarding jobs. I don't know if that's really a
we think
thing,
of it
but-
as job hoarding. Yeah, workers can hoard jobs too. And but also like the lack of opportunity, like I might be looking to move jobs, but like I don't have as many options, but I'm going to keep the one that I have and not just quit and look for something in the meantime. It's not something we see all the time. There's probably good reason for it. Most people think that after the pandemic, it got so hard to hire people that firms were a little burned. And we're like, all right, well, now that we have people, I'm not going to let them go. It took me like 8 months to fill that role. We're fading from that moment. Like every year, we're getting farther and farther away from that time. And I think layoffs are starting to pick up.
It's interesting to think about the trends that you just talked about as compared to some of the, I would say, more anecdotal notes that we hear about preferences in the job market, particularly for early career folks. In the federal workforce, we often heard about preferences where people don't want to stay in jobs for a long period of time. They want to actually move around. And I always question that a little bit as like more like we want that to be the case rather than that is actually the case. But the other thing I wanted to actually ask about, like before all the economists get together and have their big, are we having a recession party? That's a big period of time where you noted that the government is seeing indicators where they should be thinking, here's where or how I might intervene in order to head some of this off. So you're talking about hiring slowing down. What is in, if anything, the government toolkit that they should be thinking about that could in fact help spur hiring? Or is that even something that should ponder doing at all?
Oh, it's an interesting question because we often think of government economic policy as the Fed, and they, those interest rates, they go up or down. So it's there's only really like two ways to go. But in so many ways, beyond just this current labor market, the federal government has backed away from active fiscal policy. Really, the only fiscal policy that the federal government is comfortable doing is intervening at the height of a recession to prop up what we would call aggregate demand, but basically like help people who have lost a job, help people who can't afford to eat. They kind of wait for the car crash before they send the ambulance, and that's what they're comfortable doing. They are not policing the road as much. And that's something that historically fiscal policy has done a lot more, but that, kind of this century, they've really stuck to, we come in after the crisis is declared and leave the Fed to the proactive management. And that's also how they view like most federal intervention into the labor market. They don't raise the minimum wage anymore. They don't regulate wage and hour. They don't do a great job of enforcing wage and hour laws. They don't have things like requirements for paid sick days. I mean, in so many ways, the government has stepped back from the labor market altogether and has just let it run its course, and that's unfortunate for the American worker because the consequences that has been about 4.5 decades of growing inequality in our economy and wages and working conditions that don't support a middle-class lifestyle. And it's so funny to see all these like, how do we get manufacturing jobs? We need to bring manufacturing back. And it's like, listen, sure, I hear you. There was a period of time where economic conditions came together that a middle-class job was created from the production sector. Unions helped a lot with that. But it's almost like it was just a combination of federal policy and economic circumstances that combined in manufacturing in the 1950s and 60s that's not the only way that it can combine, or the only, way that it's possible. We associate manufacturing with being a good job because it was unionized during the gangbuster manufacturing era of the 1950s and 60s. That is not what's going to happen today. And it's not what we need to happen. It's not like the only good job we'll ever have in America is manufacturing. We've also done almost nothing to make things outside of manufacturing good jobs. And I remember once an economist told me, like, what's so amazing about sitting in a line at a factory for 10 hours a day, like doing one movement of your arm? The only thing good about it is that you got to like support your family and you had healthcare and retirement. There are so many other jobs that, the reason why they don't have, dignity and respect in our economy is because we refuse to give it to them, not because it's not possible.
Right. At a point in time when union membership is down.
Union membership now in the private sector is lower than it was before the National Labor Relations Act was passed. So employers have done such a good job of stripping out union protections from this law. It's as if it doesn't exist and we've never had it, which is really striking, because if you read a history of labor law in the 1920s, you're like, wow, this was brazen. And we're right. That's where we are right now.
So I feel like we've really not hewn to the optimist side of the economy here. But maybe given everything you've laid out between the labor market cooling, lack of hiring, a weak recovery, heading to a stoplight, and policy misalignment, what should we be looking for in the next 3 to 6 months? Like, what are kind of the leading indicators that, the Economist Party will look at after the fact to determine a recession, and where can we kind of get signals on where we're actually heading? I will use a pun now because the title of this segment is warning signs, and so I wish to know some concrete warning signs, Kathryn.
Concrete warning signs. Yeah, I mean, in some ways we already have them. The unemployment rate is going up and has for 3 months. So if it keeps going up, that's the warning sign number one. What people will look at is unemployment insurance claims and the number of people who are trying to get coverage because they were laid off from their job. And once that starts ticking up, some of those claims have ticked up, but not a ton. They'll also look at total layoffs in the economy. And after that, they'll look at hiring in more cyclical, or job growth in more cyclical sectors, which in some ways we're already seeing. But like, we have more healthcare jobs in 1 month because we have a lot of old people and they require a lot of healthcare. That doesn't necessarily reflect the strength of our economy. It reflects demographics. Or like, we have teachers because we have children, whereas something like tech and manufacturing and construction and transportation and warehousing, those tend to reflect economic activity. So those markets continuing to do poorly. Manufacturing has done pretty poorly, so has tech, but especially professional and business services. Once those start to have big job losses, the overall economy could still be posting positive job growth. But when those sectors kind of all align on shedding jobs, that's where we're past the red light. We ran the red light. We are getting pulled over.
Oh dear. Well, and in the pulling over, I mean, maybe we can have a slightly optimist bent, which is what policy moves, and close us out here on what policy moves could actually help us change the trajectory. Like, what if you could be queen for the day and wave your magic wand to do some policy changes here? What would stop us from running the red light and maybe help us glide gracefully through a yellow light? And then pick up speed.
I caught that yellow. It was yellow, sir.
Mhm.
Listen, I think what I try to stress is that there are a lot of people who are really struggling in the economy. And it's not because a recession is coming. It's because we've had 45 years of terrible structural economic policy, everything from not investing in families, not investing in workers and unions and childcare and the minimum wage. And a recession does not change any of that. It makes it harder, but it doesn't change where the fundamental weakness in our economy comes from. So recessions are important. They inflict a lot of economic pain on a lot of people, but your kind of perpetual state of economic malaise and misery in this economy is not coming from the unemployment rate jumping from 4.4 or 4.3 to 5. It's coming from not increasing the minimum wage for 16 years. It's coming from not investing in families. It's coming from not having or enforcing decent labor law. And those things are changeable. You can't prevent a recession from ever happening again, but we could have childcare. So, as this economy starts to contract further, unless we're able to change course, keep your eye on the ball, like blame who's ever president, dislike whoever you want. But the economy doesn't, even when the economy had an unemployment rate of 4%, you still had a hard time paying the bills. And that's not because the employment rate is a cure-all. So recessions happen, and that sucks, but it's almost like a fatalistic thing that recessions will occur. There's nothing fatalistic about the awful policy structure we have today. That is fixable, and that's changeable, and that's what you should focus on.
I have one last cheeky question.
Yeah.
What is the worst economic take you have heard from a very serious person? And those are in all caps, very serious person lately.
Jesus, where do I start? Oh my God. So, okay, here's the one I remember most recently. Manufacturing has lost jobs over the year. Mm-hmm. And this is like, we're going to have tariffs in order to have manufacturing, and like it's shedding jobs faster than any other sector. And the White House press secretary said the reason that like manufacturing is doing okay because we posted jobs in construction. So like, what makes us have manufacturing jobs? That there's jobs in another sector. And I was like, whoa, honey, that's not how sectors work. So that one was great. The guy who they appointed to be at the Fed, I don't remember his name, but he's there. Yeah, he has the worst takes. I think, but someone, maybe the Treasury Secretary. No, it was Kevin Hassett, just said on TV that the U.S. debt situation has improved. That was the worst take I've ever heard. I'm like, man, but does it count as a worst take when they're just like so incredibly factually incorrect? Like, I don't know if that's a take. So I think the press secretary is saying that manufacturing is doing okay because construction is adding jobs. That is a take. Kevin Hassett saying the national debt is going down. That's just plain wrong. So I don't know if that counts as a take. I'm going to go back to, I know manufacturing sector is doing okay because we have construction jobs, which I'm sure is very comforting to all those manufacturers who have shed jobs. Like, don't worry, you're losing jobs, but the construction industry is gaining them. So actually you're fine.
Perfect. I'm sure that switching those sectors will be seamless and that growth will enable a happy future economy for us all.
Happy economy future, everyone.
On that decidedly moderately optimistic note, we thank you, Kathryn, for joining us here on Sirens. And for those listening, if you haven't taken a chance to like us or leave a comment, please do. And we'll see you next time.